Chile with Aristoteles moon, Mercury, our Mercury, the ascendant, 17 degrees Sag, moon 13 degrees Sag. And Mercury is in 20 degrees Capricorn, separating from an opposition to Jupiter. A nice reception between the moon and Jupiter, emphasizing big relational themes and big issues around beliefs, philosophies. But here's the thing, I was wondering where Uranus is at, and it's in the sixth house. With Lilith separating from the opposition, Venus in the second house, but is not coming from that Uranus. So I was like, where is this energy coming from? And I'm getting the sense that it's coming from Sag. So Sagittarius is the great energy transmutation. And we think about it, it's the sign after Scorpio. And so while Jupiter in Sag can be seen as superficial because of its expansive fire and because it's optimistic, it's okay, particularly by those who, and I know that people are going to give me the how can you say that people are so philosophical and so on and so forth, um, because it doesn't succumb to the Scorpio depths of the well. It may be perceived as superficial, even though it's after Scorpio. It's already been in that well. So its benevolence might be perceived as lack of depth, whereas it's actually the fire of transmutation. And it's an incredibly tantric energy. At first I was like Uranus, but then but then I'm like, no, the moon is in Sag. And the moon is relational. And Jupiter retrograde gives us eureka after eureka regarding relationships and relations, patterns. Relations is not only romantic or erotic, but here we have this really, Sagittarius is where people practice the um, energy transmutation, okay, and or the sexual energy transmutation. Um, I have Uranus there, so I don't really practice anything. It's just like things just happen or not. But here is something that came up regarding that, and this is that when we talk about the fire or the Kundalini fire, people expect um, deep lust or passion. And underneath lust is where we need love. Sometimes, and I dare say more often than not, if it is lustful, it means that the love we need is not erotic. Let me tell you, let me say it as a Uranus that would be ingressing to their Uranus opposition. Okay? As a Uranus 10th house, as a Uranus Sag. Okay? Moon was just crossing my Uranus. I know that because I was exposed to sexuality as something that's not sacred, I kept trying to look for sacred sexuality only to find out my child needs that are completely unerotic needed to be met. And this is something that um, so a lot of, and it would come from it could come from people's most weird sexual fantasies even. It's kind of like what's underneath, what's underneath, what's underneath. Grew up with a missing dad. I needed dad to hug me when I was an infant. It was my parents divorced when I was 2 years old. Okay, that's what I need a cuddle as a child. Not completely not erotic, but it's not how it begins. And And this is where a lot of people could both get into swirls of life energy transmutation that overtakes them, particularly if there is a Uranus Sag around them. Okay, because I thought it must come from Uranus. It must come from Uranus. Um, but Uranus is in the sixth house, and it's not Uranus hour, it's not Uranus night, it's not Venus hour, it's not Venus night. And the 13th degree is Aries, so there's nothing, there's nothing Venus here. And then I realized that there is this fire of transmutation that is the aftermath of the wells of Scorpio. If Scorpio could be obsessed with the dark, there can be the desire to transmute that. And for those that have like a placement in Saturn and the Mars, which is the sexual drive in Scorpio, I don't envy you because it's like going backwards. It's like your heart is in a certain place, and then you try to act on it, and you run into the depth of deep. So depending on what decan of Scorpio it is, that can be quite challenging. Um, but this is also where the fire of Sagittarius, the expansive fire of expansive in the sense of expanding. Okay, um, it it brings everything that was needing attention to the surface, and this is where people might experience it as erotic rejection. Now, let's face it, because we live in a world where so many children are trafficked and targeted even in the astral. Okay, I'm not talking about the non-volitional things that happen in the astral. I'm talking about the fact that there are also things that are intentionally targeting the astral, and infants are not exempt from that, even if they had the best upbringing. So, um, many times the erotic rejection or the rejection of the erotic is something that was a certain phase where the child or the infant needed to be met with um, someone who wouldn't violate them. And people can be on either side of the erotic rejection. And usually it means that, let's say, one person ran into a person who the tantric fire of transmutation put them into a child state, and they need non-erotic. They did okay. They don't need sex right now. Okay, but not because they are adult that doesn't need sex right now, but because they are a child. And so the other person could be running into a very sudden and unexpected rejection of their eroticism just when they ran into it. Okay, just when it was triggered. And this is where sometimes they would need to look at, do they have a child that needs to be treated with, and it doesn't mean that they were molested as a child, or they could have had the greatest upbringing, but they could have been molested on the astral. And that would be an invitation. It's very uncomfortable to look at one's non-erotic aspect and the infant self or the child self. And again, maybe not. Um, or it can be that they ran into eroticism and then they meet a child self, and they needed to trust themselves that they wouldn't harm a child erotically or molest a child. A lot of intricacies there, particularly because many people don't run into that, but only as adults because of the missing things in the development that affect all of us more so than we know. So, Mercury here in Saturn sign, opposing Jupiter, separating from the opposition to Jupiter, it can be basically that it is time to tend to the missing in the development phase of the child or the infant. Now, again, this is Sagittarius. Of course, if there's something malefic like, trafficking agenda and stuff like that, um, that could mean, how should I say that? That could mean that what is met is something, how should I say that? Masses of anonymous graves. Okay, that's the timeline. It's kind of like there's the benevolent timeline, and there is the anonymous graves timeline. So again, I'm just trying to be optimistic here, um, because if the benevolent timeline doesn't get to be, then it's the mass graves timeline. That's normally how wars happen. Okay, because what happens in Sagittarius is we've been through the scorpionic um, depth of transformation. This is why Jupiter and Scorpio can be quite challenging, because it's the signs after Scorpio stuck in Scorpio, and it's also with the place where we're supposed to be benevolent meets the underworld, whereas Sagittarius is about coming out of the underworld. And again, Scorpio doesn't delve into the underworld to be dark necessarily. It transmutes things. It also finds out that if it how should I say that? Before they exposed Puff Daddy, he used to say, I'm a Scorpio. Kind of justifying the trafficking by that. But the whole point about Scorpio that delves into it's not to delve into the deep um, and stay there. It's to bring that depth into the light. And this is why Sagittarius is the fire of philosophical teaching. And so now, when there is intense amount of spiritual bypass because of ritual abuse trauma, okay, ritual abuse trauma creates intense amount of spiritual bypass. For example, thinking, and it's sometimes not about spiritual bypass, but simply lack of praxis. For example, Tantra was brought to the West, and everybody thought it's about sacred sex trafficking. No, it's not. And I can't blame them, because the indigenous people were calling sexual sovereignty a place where they can safely be trafficked, which is sex work. It's that would come from intense sexual trauma as infant, is how they train there. so-called sovereign sex workers. They rape the children, to put it there. Any place that has, how can we see there is corruption in culture, which causes, how did Great Britain manage to get an entire nation addicted to opiates and loot the silver? Only if there has been a megalithic history by the billions of infants raped. And then they send those infants because the child doesn't want to marry or the child is hypersexual. And then the hypersexual child is sent to be sex trafficked under the guise of sex workers culture, under the guise of thinking that that the raped child, is promiscuous. This is also the how and why, when we talk about the benevolent setting, there's so many people that are affected when they actually practice, yes, embodied spiritual sexuality. The reality is, it can be fits of crying suddenly, it can be a child needing to be hugged suddenly, it can be mass graves, mass graves, mass graves. Where's that coming from? Seeing the timelines of the trafficking, um, there were women that were connecting to the cosmic or collective womb, seeing the trafficking that girls suffered and boys suffered, collective birth traumas. Like, I know a nice studio with some lotus and candle flowers is not really showing what Tantra actually is. It's life energy unveiled. And that's why everything that was blocking life energy also culturally collapses down. And when people try to control it within themselves, they are 9/11ing into themselves. I'm half Dutch. Some people do look like the 9/11. Some people, if you put if you put them together, they look. A plane can crash into that. It's very tall. I'm attending to political assassination prevention. I attended to several cases, and I said, well, if you put these two together and somebody tries to assassinate them, we'll say it's 9/11 because they're so tall. So, um, and the reason, because I had this image of these tall people 9/11ing into themselves, they having a tower moment. So, but it's true. Benevolently, one could say that they are falling, but but it's not a falling when there is something missing, and it's a total collapse of, how should I say that? Anything that's less driven, when we take it to the fire of the life energy, it's burning and collapsing into itself, and there is a little baby or a little infant that just needs a hug. They can't meet that need at the geisha or at the red light district, or and not only that, that child needs a hug that is not sexual. So, and the reason, um, I have a YouTube friend that addressed this in real detail, and she said, in cases children are born and either they're taken from their parent or separated, a separation trauma with the infant, or for some reason it can be something as simple as I don't know, an early birth, then the child needs an incubator or something like that. But there can be in cases where the child doesn't meet the needs to be held in a way that is nourishing, that is providing a safe, okay, not a possessive. It's something that's very challenging to tackle because birth traumas are often used by those who try to permeate the fabric of conception to basically begin trafficking the infant, and um, and that can create erotization around something that is inherently completely non-erotic. Because most of our society is in different phases of dealing with that, and this is the beginning, is the onset of misplaced arousal. It's entire cultures, and because the wealth of nations was by creating those traumas so that they can get these people addicted. And that's how they get bankers, lawyers, judges, politicians, bureaucracy. There's where there is where the Mercury's okay, have a second book, because Mercury in Capricorn can mean two books. Think about bookkeeping. Okay, to hide that addiction, which they don't have a reference to, and it can undermine a grown adult. And the suddenness of the crossing of that threshold is like, hey, that person was an adult. They seemed erotic. Why now not? What happened? They went with that threshold. They began to meet those needs. They didn't keep another book. They addressed their infant traumas. And so, okay, I mean about bookkeeping. Um, so, and that's the suddenness, because when they expected to have a certain response, what I'm getting is that they ran into an erotic rejection, and some of them were expecting to have like the upper hand and so on. But here I'm talking about something way more primordial. Um, is a big transformation, and some of them even saw what the child self is needing. But that was used by the network as a bait, and it could only latch onto people that are. And here is where it latches onto people when they begin to heal. I had another reading about how being far enough from the problem to see the problem, to find solution, close enough to see the problem, but far enough to find the solution. Um, and here is a topic of children, basically children versus eroticism. Because if you think about childbirth and conception, It's fully erotic, fully orgasmic, fully spiritual. But the child is not. The child, and it's not because the child is innocent. Okay, because there's nothing more innocent than sex. It's violence is not sex, but people have the misplaced arousal because of the permeating timelines of violence into conception, birth, and sex and infanthood. Look at that 22. Look at the 22 as I speak. And then when the Sagittarius archetype says that, it's like, oh, come on, that's superficial. That's where all the deep stuff. Underneath those deep stuff is the infant, usually absolutely not sexual. Why am I saying usually? It's because when people want to connect with their eroticism, they connect with the spirit of innocence, of their own, of looking at things from an innocent eye. In fact, one of the practices that are that my that my teacher learned, uh, which was bringing not as tantra but as practical practice, regardless of which spiritual origins, to connect with a sexuality from a sacred place, from a healthy place, also medically. Okay, that a lot of people curate it from candida, and from all types of things that really were associated with timelines of violence permeating sacredness of life. That's that sacred sexuality is not something that's up there in a temple. It's about life, and this is where the foundations of all of our societies were on slavery, enslaving, oppression, and so on and so forth. That it's almost inaccessible on a worldly scale. This is why this war is going to be so big when Saturn Neptune is in Aries, and no one has to die. um, like I said, very profound, and the core of that energy reading is somebody could be coming burned with passion to someone, and they're like, okay, they're infant now, and they need you to not be sexual with them. And sometimes a person could be afraid to connect with that infant child that doesn't want or need sexuality, both because they could have had no access to that, okay, with memory and stuff like that, but also because they would be fearing rejection. That if they are a child right now, and of course, when there were violations, then they could, in that could bring a lot of mass graves timelines, because the child begins to manifest mass graves. And they're usually going to be anonymous graves. This is also how the anonymous graves of the Great War were created. Beta Persei, probably Beta Perseis. It's a Beta Persei eclipse now. Every time I see that, I see those mass graves. Okay, I cannot say the words I see dead people in that context. Um, because I actually tried to channel dead people in the past. It is. um, yeah, moon hour. Okay, there's a shit ton of darkness in the world, and I was watching. There is the picture running in Israeli media of the Iranian man. Let me see. Yes, that's about to be assassinated. And it's kind of unclear because they shoot the people who demonstrate and then they caught this guy and was looking totally Western. Um, and and he has and he has an Iranian name and they sent him to execution. It's kind of like, but they shoot people all the time. Like, why do they even bother? And so, and then there is this terrible, helpless thing because I attend to political assassination prevention, and that's a political assassination. I'm like, okay, the culture of the decision makers is such that they are acting as a cult of treason, and there isn't a reasonable person to turn to. I wanted to see, a lot of people are calling the Shah or the Prince, and I'm like, once you cross that threshold of understanding, knowing those things, then everything blended. A civilian could appeal and have one timeline and not understand why is nothing done because a lot of the people that could have stopped it, I hope not all, so that there is a point of interference. And it happens in such a ridiculous juxtaposition to the fact that people are constantly being shot in the street. And somebody said that escaped there said they're shooting people direct in the heart. And my first thought was, that's euthanasia. That's what, so not that it's good to be shot in the heart or anything like that, but uh, and then there is this guy who's about to be executed, and literally almost anyone I can think of that could stop it is in an atmosphere where they would be praised for cruelty and condemned for doing the right thing. Now, in the face of the world, it's supposed to be different. Um, but they are at the junctures where where they're supposed to affect the world to be like them, which is the enslaved free man. Another thing that came up today is the fact that um, I saw an article again about the fact that high tech people from Israel are shaping the systems, the security systems in United States that aged bad with ice. But also of how the aftermath of the Second World War was not United States winning over the Nazis, but importing the Nazis through paperclip. And the onset of that being literally brown shirts that historically were assassinated. And it happened in Israel, by the way, before 7 October as well. There were the brown shirts. But it's true. And I even had a Model UN colleague in a previous Facebook that said, "Well, the brown shirts need to remember that they were assassinated by the SS. So they were the SA that was assassinated by the SS because they were killing civilians and raping civilians." I had a gay survivor of child abuse Facebook friend that because she was identified with the left wing and was gay, was threatened by rape and was afraid to walk her dog in freaking Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is like Amsterdam, you know. And had in university, I had a friend who was gay, and she founded the gay house in Beersheba, and she escaped to Berlin because there was she didn't see any unity in in being murdered. Like, although I definitely see the unity here because it's kind of like it's mass graves, it's bigger than the World War, it's really everyone. If you rape, nobody cares about your origin. It's um, and this is how remember all the financial sanctions on Germany and they don't buy Deutsche Kauf nicht by Nazis and so on. But it's kind of like, but they imported them to United States, so that was paperclip. That and that definitely looks like it. And the United States is dealing with that. I mean, Trump is dealing with that. Is no, seriously. What happens if ice knocks at what happens if ice knocks at Mar-a-Lago? There isn't a reason why it wouldn't. And I'm not even talking about Melania. It's like it's that random. I mean, if they're already raiding places, what about Epstein Island? That would be taking the power back in the face of basically how they probably trained them.